And with that, I will move on to my next great introduction. I'm excited to have Michael Bloxton on the panel today. So Michael Bloxton, a self-made telecom finance real estate investor, is now the founder and CEO of Nebula Space Enterprise, Inc. He's launched 5 Nebula subsidiaries with a mission to provide humans with access to deep space and infinite resources. Each organization plays a pivotal role in phase 1 of this plan to preserve Earth and its precious resources and propel humanity into a thriving future. A futurist and visionary entrepreneur, Michael Bloxton is the founder, CEO, and chairman of Nebula Space Enterprise, Inc. Using artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, sensory, blockchain, and satellite technologies, Nebula will propel humanity into its next phase of evolution via communications, lifestyle, and defense. Michael's focus on communications advancement in space is an extension of 10 years in the cell tower real estate industry, where he cultivated successful plans that returned tangible ROI and made substantial impacts on each client's bottom lines. He then became a commercial real estate entrepreneur, acquiring a diverse portfolio of land, office, industrial, apartment, and retail properties across the US. Sorry, I'm getting a little tongue-tied at the end there, but hi, Michael. Excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. I didn't realize my bio was that long. That's cool. Thank you for having me. And I think Trent teed me up perfectly for what we're all talking about here with just comms. And I think I'm going to take it a slightly different slant. I 100% agree. And I think that last question was even more appropriate. You know, where is the funding coming from? Why do they need to be thinking about this? And I think all of us, Rachel, even you agreed that we would love for everyone to want to be a space explorer. I don't know if we're ever going to get to that unanimous consent, but hopefully some of the data I share now will help tip people that aren't thinking about space the way that they should be. Clearly everyone on this call is, but we'll see. So let me, with that, let me share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Sure can, looks good.
All right. Presenter mode. So again, this is a slightly different slant on why space and why communications. Every once in a while, something revolution comes along that changes the world. And as you mentioned in my bio, we actually have several different companies, 3 very specifically related to communications, compute, blockchain, and cybersecurity. Pretty much if you want to process data in space, you want to be able to trust that data and you want to be able to protect that data. And that's the purpose of those 3 companies. And compute is actually launching compute capability onto the outside of the ISS that is 100 times, and it's a demo, it's 100 times more capable than any other computing known in space today. 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, which was revolutionary for how humans communicate. And the telephone has evolved greatly. What we saw in 1983 was internet and cellular communication. So for 100 years, we were literally building 5 million telephone poles to connect the United States alone with telephone. And then in 1983, here comes cellular communications. And as you heard, my background is in cellular. And cellular communications goes on for several decades. And then in 2006 and 2007, we have Steve Jobs with the iPhone, and then AWS is created. And I don't think a lot of people knew that AWS was going to become what it now is, which is the leader of cloud computing. And then that kept going, and we had another revolution here with SpaceX and its reusable rockets, and then specifically Starlink satellites. So if you look at how these things come together as a story, if you go along the bottom there, you can see the development of network data centers and ultimately cloud computing. And I don't know if any one of us actually uses our phone just for a phone. Just to give the example of what it means to have internet, network, cloud computing, et cetera. It's not about the phone. The phone is, even to Trent's point, it's about the communication of data. Sometimes that is a voice set of data, or it's an actual zeros and ones set of data, whether that's pictures or SAR images, et cetera. So if you look along the bottom, the evolution, we built 5 million telephone poles to connect the United States with telephone wire, literally wiring the United States for about 100 years. Then, and that's where my experience comes in, we started building cell phone towers, and we had 500,000 cell phone towers built right now in the United States. So you go an order of magnitude in capability going from telephone wire to cell towers increase, but you decrease the amount of infrastructure required. And then if you go all the way up to Starlink right now, everyone in the space industry is freaking out that we have 50,000, 100,000 cell towers. But again, you're talking about another order of magnitude less infrastructure with an order of magnitude increase in capability once it's all built out. And the unique thing here is we're not talking 5 million for the United States, 500,000 cell towers for the United States. We're talking 50,000 satellites for the entire globe. And there are several companies addressing that underlying base network infrastructure. One other thing that most people don't realize, and again, directly related to my experience, is the ability to route traffic is 100% reliant on computing. So if you think about being able to get connected to someone across the globe, the amount of computing that goes into that, and the amount of computing that goes into pinging your phone 6 times a second to know where you are so that they always know exactly where to route the phone, the data center required literally just to route phone calls and connectivity is immense, let alone actually wanting to do any computation. So the critical, what I think is the weakest link here of again, teeing off of what Trent had gone through with deep space communications, et cetera, the critical link there, the weakest link is computing, because you might be able to have all the connectivity points, but then you won't be able to route it. You're actually seeing that now with some of the companies doing these bigger satellite constellations, including Starlink. The computing issue is just a routing issue. They can't get enough computing just to be able to route the conversations. Now, imagine limitless energy, limitless computing, limitless quantum encrypted communications. Now the combination of those is what will really spur on the next revolution and evolution of humanity. So if we look at how computing is done here, which I'll dive more into in a second, you think about it from a sustainability, and again, I'll give you data in a second. We have the capability, because of space specifically, to connect the entire globe in a sustainable way. So if you think about the entire globe right now, there's 8 billion people on Earth that are connected, not through wireless connectivity. If you again think about the examples I just gave, the amount of wire, and if anyone has seen undersea cables, and this is a big issue with the DoD, is what happens if our undersea cables are cut? How do we connect to all of our partners and our forward operating bases, et cetera? So the opportunity here to build true global connectivity is real because of space. Now, what about secure data transfer? If we move computing into space, we have the ability to move real-time information, highly secured, and this is critical as we're becoming a society that's extremely reliant on digital communications and information. Now, take all these together, energy is already $1 trillion industry, telecom is already $1 trillion industry, and computing is going to be $1 trillion industry in just a few years from now. And then the entire space economy will be, depending on which report you read, $1 trillion by 2030 or 2040. So we're really at a point in society and business, and especially in our capitalist society, of being able to create an opportunity here. And again, going back to the funding, where you can start to see all these dots getting connected. So how will we get there? And how will you find your place in space, which is something Nebula is extremely interested in? This is going to take the village. It's not just an individual or individual company. Well, welcome to Nebula. This is the birthplace of the next evolution. Nebula Compute specifically is bringing cloud computing to space right now. As I mentioned, later this year, we have a demo going on the outside of the ISS that it's 100 times more compute capable than anything else going up in space today. Now, why are we doing this? Why is this so important? Globally, we produce so much energy just in general. And in order to meet the energy demands of humanity, we have to literally produce something like double the amount of all the energy sources we've ever had. And then if you look at just IT and data, we're already using 20% of all of a significant percentage of all of Earth's energy. And then by 2040, it's 20%. That is a very unsustainable path that we're on from an energy perspective and the resources of Earth. So if you think about the limited amount of renewables and non-renewables, the data centers contribute to 0.5% of the total gigatons of emissions. And that was in 2018. It is only growing. Again, we are only seeing a trend to want more data. I'll give you a personal example. I don't know if any of you have taken less photos because the sensor on your phone takes a bigger image size. That's not the case. We take, if anything, we take more photos because now they're beautiful and they're digital, and we don't connect it to needing to take less just because we have the ability to create more. In short, we simply can't meet the energy demand, preserve our air, water, and fuels, and connect the globe by building more terrestrial infrastructure. We can't be building data centers in the middle of the Sahara or digging fiber optic cables all the way across South America and Africa. So Nebula is launching server sets coming. We're actually in design, about to finalize design, should be launching late next year in 2025, going through those sales now. And then we're going to grow into actual data centers in space, a clear path for us. Here's the current state of cloud computing. Now, you heard me talk about energy, which I think a lot of people have been hearing about, but most people don't understand the impact that data centers have with water. So if you extend Earth's network to space with Nebula server sets, the energy is 100% independent of Earth's using solar and nuclear. So we're not even touching that closed ecosystem of Earth, which is sometimes hard to think about if you do think about the spaceship of Earth as a single unit. We won't need to use that. There's no water required for cooling. There are some data centers that use something seriously ridiculous, like 1 billion gallons of water for cooling. Now they're using less energy, but then they're using 1 billion gallons of potable water, which is absolutely insane. And the heat, the other factor here is heat. Most people don't think of, okay, well, if you had sustainable energy and you had weren't using water, you would still be putting the heat and converting that energy, however you're using it or getting it, back into heat into the atmosphere. And we're seeing what's happening when you put data centers all the way up in the Arctic, and it's basically melting ice. And if you put it into the ocean, you're heating the ocean. And it may seem insignificant, but we're already seeing impacts, real world impacts of how this is not cool. So Nebula is focused on that core part of the infrastructure, not necessarily the communications, but the computing that supports communications and expands the actual network capability. Again, you might be able to relay data, but you'll always be limited by how much data you can relay. And you'll always be limited by what you can do with that data as it's relayed. And that's what Nebula is focused on. So we're already doing this, as you heard. Nebula's core focus here around the computing is ensuring freedom of information, freedom of communication in space. Now, that brings me to the end of it. I tried to run through this. I know everyone's been on here for quite some time. I have been good at getting this around 10 minutes. If you want to find out more in general, we have Nebula in Space Insider, which is a daily newsletter, comes out with all sorts of really cool cutting edge space stuff. Free, you can sign up there, nebulamedia.space/newsletter. NebulaIncorporated.com if you want to learn a little bit more about what phase 1 is all about for Nebula's mission to provide all of humanity access to deep space and infinite resources. We also have a podcast, Your Place in Space. So we just started rolling that out. Very interesting conversations. Tim's actually on one of those that hasn't rolled out yet, but we have him coming up. And then finally, if you want to learn more about me, michaelbloxton.com, MichaelBloxton, michaelbloxton.com if you want to learn more. And that's it. That's the whole spiel.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I see one already from Adrian. So Michael, how will you cool your satellites? Vacuum is well known as an insulator, same as water, other liquids, superheating and emitting droplets.
That becomes the IP, quite specifically. The radiation is kind of a linear problem if you think about scaling, but thermal is an exponential problem, because if you put more things that create heat, you have to get it out. So heat is, the way to think about heat in space that's easiest for me, or at least, was if you think about it like a liquid, you actually need to move it from the thing that's generating heat and push it out into deep space, because you're absolutely right. I mean, that's why I love this bottle, right? There's no convection through a vacuum. And that is the critical scaling issue that we think we've solved.
Interesting. I've got one while we wait for more people to write in. Michael, I'm curious what changes to the technology infrastructure we already have here on Earth would be needed in order to move this computing power into the space environment?
Nothing. We can leverage everything that we have. Again, the IP that we have is more around the radiation and thermal, but the computing, the idea is that every single year we come up with some generation of computing that's unbelievably better than what we just had a year ago. And if you take just a few years, it's multiple generations and multiple orders of magnitude at times. So the way the space industry works, because they're looking at it from a, hey, I need to be able to protect this and harden this, they typically take the computing today and bring it through this very long process. That's at best, I think it's gotten down to about 2.5 years for the most cutting edge people that don't care about space heritage. For those that care about space heritage, you're taking computing, in the best case scenario is you're taking 6 years before that compute is actually operational. Now, if anyone has a phone that's 6 years old on this call, I would be highly impressed. Unless it's brand new, 6-year-old, like even at that point, I don't think you would use it because the processing capability for what we've already been able to build with applications is so significantly different that we're not going to be able to keep up with that. So Nebula is taking a very different approach in that we want to be able to take things off the shelf, take servers, take computing that's off the shelf today and get it into space inside 12 months so that we're capable of providing everybody what they really need in terms of accessing the data that we're generating.
I've got a question here from Paul Jurasin, who spoke earlier. So if we have data centers in space, how do we meet the telecommunications speed and capacity needs into the future?
So Trent specifically called out optical communications, and that is extremely early, but not completely nascent. So there's already experiments running on the ISS and down. We're aware of multiple companies that actually have laser comms up. They're not at the scale that we need them to be in terms of gigabits per second bandwidth, but every single company we've talked to and the ones that we're partnered with all have a roadmap by which they can deliver that. So there's no technical issues necessarily with being able to deliver a communications capability. There are a lot of issues and there's a lot of things that we have to overcome, but we're not, I think the point here, when I say technical, we're not violating physics at this point for being able to deliver the capability of laser high-speed bandwidth between even our own satellites. We're not violating physics. It is a tough thing to do, but it is not impossible.
Sure. And Amy here has a question that kind of ties in the two sides of space communications that we've touched on today. Amy's question is, how do you approach comms and messaging to get the space sector involved in these multiple areas of innovation?
So my thing is, space enthusiasts live everywhere, right? All of us are space enthusiasts, and it doesn't matter what our background is. Like there are space enthusiasts that aren't involved in space whatsoever. So I don't know if getting the space industry on board is what we need to do or even focused on. It took years. I mean, we've been having this conversation since 2019 with NASA and DoD and DOE about needing to put computing up. And it was originally, hey, that's a great idea. That's novel. That's cool. And then some people were even starkly against putting computing. Why would we ever do that? We have so much capability here on Earth. But it's become highly sensitive topic where everyone now has identified, everyone as in NASA Space Force, DoD, DOE, has already identified within their own realm of whatever it is they're trying to do, a specific use case where computing is holding them back. So we don't even have to talk about why we need to do this from people that are already actively in space. They've already identified use cases where this is an issue and we need to solve it, or else we won't be able to do X, Y, and Z. So my thinking is, and that's a very small percentage. If you think about the space community that we have, it's a very tight-knit group. You go to these events and you see a lot of the same people all the time. My goal is to get the people that aren't aware of these benefits to space, which is why I kind of took the slant of sustainability around energy and water and data centers, and then connecting the other 4 billion people on the planet. Right now, it's roughly half the people are connected to the internet, high-speed internet. Half the people aren't. So how many people can contribute to society as a whole once you actually get them connected to the internet and connected to the rest of society. So taking that tack from Nebula's perspective is more important because it's easier to, oh man, someone's going to quote me on this, but I'm going to quote somebody else and I forget who gave it to me. It's easier to give birth than to raise the dead. So if you think about, it's easier for us to create a new space enthusiast than it is to take someone who staunchly believes in whatever space perspective they have and then have them change that perspective. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, sure. I think that's an interesting perspective. Adrian has another follow-up question to his earlier one about cooling these satellites. He asks if you're favoring smaller satellites for cooling and how that balances against the idea that there's better efficiency of comms computing and hardware, et cetera, from larger satellites.
Adrian, we should connect on LinkedIn, by the way. And then obviously I gave you a bunch of different things. So unfortunately, we don't have a choice. If you think about the problem we're trying to address, which is computing, you need more. Flat out, you need more. And if you look at the single greatest, I'll give you an example. If you own a data center here and you're talking to somebody else that owns a data center, the way you talk about the data center is literally in megawatts. I have a 10 megawatt data center. I have a 2 megawatt data center. It's not about the compute capability. It's literally about the energy they use. And if you think about even going back to the example of telecom, they're now looking at, well, I have this much compute capability based on the amount of kilowatts and megawatts that it uses, even in telecom. So the conversation shifts directly to the amount of energy. Adrian, so to your point, you need size because you need to generate a significant amount of energy, but you also need to be able to dissipate that heat. And again, that's the problem that Nebula is corely focused on, is this thermal issue, but we need size. So we're not going to go CubeSat. And quite frankly, if you think about data centers here on Earth, like you could have a server rack in your office, but you're not going to have a data center in your office. If you have a data center in your office, it's going to be an oven. And it's always made sense for all these companies, every company in the world, to go bigger and better. So I think that same terrestrial model is going to play out in space.
Thank you, Michael. I have one more question that I'm interested in. I'm curious to know how large this network would have to be in space in order to offload the sustainability pressures that data centers are creating on Earth right now.
Good question. So that's why it's a long-term goal. We have so much infrastructure, right? I mean, we're serving 4 billion people. So the amount of infrastructure and the amount of energy, we need to get to the point where, and I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we're not using Earth, right? Earth has its base infrastructure. I mean, it's crazy, but I'm sure some of us still know people that have a wired phone. I mean, I have a couple buildings that I own where I am forced to have a wired phone for the elevator, which is kind of ridiculous. Can't have wireless in that particular instance for safety. So there is still a need. There's always going to be a need for infrastructure. We need to get to the point where we're offloading, we're extending Earth's network, which is really kind of that first phase of supporting sustainability. Next is then being able to use the growth. The other 4 billion people shouldn't ever be using necessarily Earth systems. They should be using space systems. And then you can get to the point after that, which I think is, you're probably looking at like 2 decades before you actually have a measurable impact against anything that Earth is creating.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for hopping on today, Michael. I think that is it for the questions in the chat. I'm just going to check that I'm not missing anything. But I appreciate you hopping on and showing this presentation today. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, no worries. I'm glad I could keep it short and sweet, keep us on time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any contact information you want to share in the chat, now is a great time to do that. But for the rest of us, thank you all for joining today. It's been a great conversation. I hope you all enjoy the presentations from our panelists today. That is a wrap for January.